Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning and welcome to the radio program here this morning, Human Trafficking, Operation Abolition. And this is our inaugural program for this segment. And my guest today is Noreen Gosch. And the purpose of this program is dedicated to the procuring the abolition of the trafficking of humans. And the acronym PATH, P-A-T-H. And again, my guest today is Noreen Gosch. Noreen is the mother of kidnapped victim Johnny Gosch and the author of the Johnny Gosch Bill, which became law just shy, I believe, of 2 years after her son's disappearance. And Noreen, I'd like to welcome you to the show and tell you in advance I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to meet with us and to discuss this issue of human trafficking.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show. I appreciate it, and I appreciate what you're trying to do with the bringing forth of information about human trafficking. It is a very serious issue that's affecting not only our country, but the entire world, and it has reached a multi-billion-dollar level business in which they are basically selling human beings, primarily women and children, into prostitution and what we now call white slavery. And what brought me into this aspect of it was really the developments of how my son was kidnapped. He started out doing his Sunday morning newspapers in 1982 on a Sunday morning, September 5th in West Des Moines. He got partway down the street and he was stopped by a man in a car asking directions. And Johnny had always been taught not to speak to strangers, so he continued on. The man made a U-turn in the middle of the street and then followed him down the street and pulled in at the corner where Johnny was picking up the newspaper bundles for the day. He was pulling his little wagon, and our little dog was with him. There were other kids at the newspaper drop that morning, as well as a 44-year-old attorney who is now a judge in Des Moines. He was picking up his son's papers as well. He noticed the man as he pulled in. The man shut off the engine of the car, pulled his feet out onto the curb, and began engaging my son and the other boys in conversation. The attorney noticed the license plate, and the car was blue. The man was impeccably dressed in a very neat navy blue, kind of like a warm-up suit, active wear, and they noticed that he had a brown manila envelope on the seat of the car. The other people at the corner picked up their papers and they left, including the attorney, leaving my son and one other boy who was 16. Johnny turned to the other boy and said, "This guy scares me. Something's wrong. I'm going home." And with that, Johnny started down the street pulling the wagon as quickly as he could go with our little dog with him. The man that was in the car suddenly pulled the door shut, swung his legs, back into the car, and started the car up. But before he left the corner, he flicked the dome light on and off 3 times. Then he sped away. Another man, and this is according to the witnesses, another man came out from between a group of trees between 2 houses and started following my son down the street and around the corner. I don't think my son knew he was being followed at that point because the other man was about, a good distance behind him.
Yeah.
He was described as being very, very tall, well over 6 foot tall. Johnny went around the corner, and that is when the second witness, who was in his house, in his bedroom, and he heard a car pull up rather fast, and he looked out his window. He saw my son being shot with something that he described as a type of stun gun because Johnny fell to the ground right away. And the man on foot who had been following him, plus somebody who was in the back seat of the car who jumped out, one grabbed Johnny's shoulders, one grabbed his feet, threw him in the car, and away they went, running the stop sign, turning left, going north, which was towards the interstate.
Mm-hmm.
That whole kidnapping took place in about 6 minutes. They were precision. They really were moving fast. They pulled their vehicle into a side street a ways from our house. This is information that was provided by yet another witness when our private detectives went house to house in a radius of 5 miles of our home to talk to people who were up at that time of the day who might have seen something. That man, the witness, had gotten up early, and he heard the rumbling of an engine. So he looked out his window, and he saw a van parked against the traffic flow. And he thought, well, that's odd. The guy's parked the wrong way on the street. So he watched a little bit, and within seconds, up comes the blue car, and they transferred something from the back seat wrapped in a blanket that was long, and transferred it to the van, and then both vehicles took off. We now know that what they transferred from the car to the van was my son.
Noreen, now, was the involvement of, I was thinking about this because the Johnny Gosch Bill that you authored dealt with the issue of the police and the timeliness of their involvement, correct? Because prior to that, it was 72-hour policy, was it not?
It was, and the reason the 72-hour policy was allowed is because there was no law in Iowa to protect victims of any kind of kidnapping or situation where they would be missing. Iowa had no law whatsoever. So they just used the 72-hour policy and always got away with it.
Was there in the initial their initial response to the kidnapping, was it right away? What was the timeliness of that?
Well, as soon as we knew something was wrong and Johnny didn't come home from the paper route, we started getting phone calls from neighbors saying they didn't receive their papers. So my husband went out to try to find Johnny, thinking that he was running late.
Sure.
He came back in a couple of minutes and had found just Johnny's wagon with the papers still in it. So I called the police right away. It took them 45 minutes to come to our house, and we lived about just maybe 15 blocks from the police station. So that was a long time in transit. By the time they arrived, I had called all of the people who were at the corner that morning picking up papers to get information, trying to find out what happened. Each and every one of them told me about the man in the car, described the man, described the second man on foot, described everything surrounding the kidnapping. So I had all that information, phone numbers, everything when the police arrived. I told the police everything that I knew and handed the sheet of paper to him with all the information written down. And the cop looked at me and said, well, has your son ever run away before? It was like he didn't hear me. And I said, my son has never run away, ever. I said, he was kidnapped. I said, these are statements from people who were there this morning. He said, well, I'll take that with me. We filled out the missing persons report. He left. We never saw another police officer until mid-afternoon. In the meantime, I organized searches all over the community by calling friends, asking them to go to different parts of the community and search wooded areas, deserted areas, any place where you think somebody might take a child. The idea of having them travel a great distance hadn't occurred to me yet. The search parties would come back one after one with nothing to report until one search party came, and they were extremely angry. There were 20 people in the group, and they said to me, I thought you wanted our help. And I said, I do. And they said that the police chief came out to the state park where they were searching, got up on a picnic table, used a bullhorn, and began to yell at the crowd, everybody go home, this kid is nothing but a blankety-blank runaway. And that's what was said about my boy by the West Des Moines police chief to the crowds of people who were kind enough to try and help us.